Has anyone else ever hit the 50,000 word mark on a novel and thought, I'm not funny anymore because me? Hi everyone, my name is Charlie and my cheeks are looking rather large today, aren't they? It's something I've noticed recently is that for whatever reason, my cheeks seem rounder and I'm not sure I'm here for that. Anyway, this week has been a strange one. Has it been a strange one? No. In terms of the general mundanity of life, then this week has been somewhat absurd, but otherwise everything has been perfectly normal, perfectly fine, and I've only left the house once, and that was on Friday, and it's now Tuesday. And was it Friday? It was Friday. I did not realise it was now Tuesday until I awoke this morning. The weekend, as with most things, got away from me, and it's for a very specific reason, so I will just start with this specific reason. Today, I'm gonna probably talk about some familial history of mine. You might not give a toss. It's what's gonna happen. So, Thursday night, I am lying in bed, as I usually do. It's 1 o'clock in the morning, and being unable to sleep, I end up scrolling through the internet. It's the worst thing a person can do at 1 o'clock in the morning, but it's what happened. A few weeks ago, I discovered how people went to the toilet on Everest when I couldn't sleep. So I decided I was going to Google my dad's biological father's name. Here, I'll put it into context for you. My dad's mother married quite young. Some would say she trapped a man in marriage by getting pregnant, and it being the 1950s, he did the honourable thing and married her, only to go and die 9 years later at the age of 37 from cancer, and they didn't have the treatments they have nowadays to fix it. Cut to then following year, my grandmother remarried, and that is where I got the name Heathcote from. I Googled my dad's biological father's name. Now, for years, I've been wondering whether we have any relatives left from his branch of the family tree. It's something where, on my mum's side, and I put this on Twitter, I can go back at least 120 years, if not 150 years, and I know the main branches of that family tree. I couldn't tell you like all the kids' names, but I can tell you where they fit, and it's filled with family stories, and you'll still get told stuff. Like, I'll get into a particular story in a minute, but some people, namely my grandmother, still aren't over the fact that her Auntie Hilda, who I knew from being little until she died in 2007, my nan still hasn't got over the fact that my Auntie Hilda married her sister's widow. Is the man the widow? The widower? Either way, my Auntie Hilda's sister died, my Auntie Hilda married her sister's husband, and my nan's still not over it. I know that side of the family. I know stories. I know familial arguments. I know about possible affairs that happened and how they were rectified. Very much the storytelling I got from my nan and her side of the family is what influenced my books. But my dad's side of the family I know nothing about. I know that we're not technically Heathcotes, we're only Heathcotes by adoption, but my nan, his mother, my Nana Alice, was an incredibly private person. Well, I don't know whether she was a private person. She had something of a difficult life in that her mother died giving birth to her in 1937, and her father promptly sold her off to her mother's relatives and disappeared to start a new family. I was always led to believe that this family was in London, but again, I'll get to that in a moment. All I have ever known from my Nana Alice is all the different surnames she believed that she had growing up as she was passed around the family. You know, sometimes it was sent to do work, but she didn't particularly recognise that. And there are people we meet now. Indeed, my brother is working with someone who we ended up discovering we're distantly, well, not even distantly related to. We found out, see, distance is a weird thing. Basically, his grandfather is my nan's mother's brother. Something like that. Nephew. I don't know. Someone once said that my family tree was like a spirograph, and they were correct. All of the years of looking on all of these different websites, trying to find my dad's biological father to try and do some familial history, nothing has ever happened, nothing has ever worked. And I don't know why I have this interest, why I have this want. Nobody else in my family seems to have any questions. My father seems quite content to go along with life, and finding out whether there are any branches of this tree still alive today is meaningless, really. But for whatever reason, on Thursday night into Friday morning, my interest was piqued, and I ended up signing up for a free trial of one of these ancestry websites. Well, I managed to sort out my family. I'm working for 3 hours, and all I do is get out my mother's side of the family. That's all I do, is sort her side of the family. I have the tiniest bit of a breakthrough when it comes to my dead grandmother's mother, because we'd always wondered how we were related to a certain family. And this is the same family my brother's been wondering about. He works with someone with this surname. And we've always wondered, and luckily this website told me straight away, as soon as I put my grandmother's mother's name into it, my great-grandmother's name into it, it told me how we were related. It was her maiden name. And then we find out we are actually related to these people. They're like aunts and uncles and things of my nans, which we didn't previously know about. Well, we knew about the people, but we didn't know how we were related to them. Quite honestly, I don't know whether my nan knew how she was related to them. So I feel like I've managed to crack something, but still I haven't done what I set out to do, which was to find out whether my dad's father had any other relatives left when he died. I also hadn't found out this mysterious secret about my nan's father, who, as I say, buggered off when she was born. And there's always been this tiny bit of frustration there for me, in that I share a name with my nan's father, who beggared off when she was born. And I just don't think that's a nice inheritance. Although I do think I've made the name my own. So I do more research, and I find out that my nan's father originally came from London. Well, immediately, you know how that makes me feel, finding out this part of my heritage that's from the south. I mean, I felt bad enough when I found out that I was related to people in the Potteries, but the south? Well, if I hadn't had any brandy before, I needed it then. We move on a bit, and I find out that my nan's father had tons of brothers and sisters. We move down, because to me, I've sorted that bit out then. I found out he had brothers and sisters, and I can't trace them anymore because they ended up getting married, and I can't properly figure out, because they were moving all over London, how everyone fit in. And that's fine by me. I figured out that he had relatives, but then we'll keep with the same person. I always knew that my nan's father had another family. And I knew this from my Auntie Doris's, she calls it a 90th birthday party, but it was technically a funeral. How do I know it was a funeral? She took everybody to church. She had her favourite relatives get up at the lectern and tell everyone their favourite memories of her. They sang hymns, and then they went for a wake afterwards. And she can tell everyone she likes that it was a birthday party, but it was a funeral. And Auntie Doris just wanted to make sure that things were going to go well. She wanted to see what people were going to say about her. One thing I've discovered about Auntie Doris since doing all of this history stuff is that she actually isn't even called Doris at all. But they did that whole thing that they used to do back in the day, where they gave the first child the parent's name as its first name and then called them by the second name. But the issue I have here is that my Auntie Doris's actual first name is Edith. In my book, Doris's best mate is called Edith. I wondered why my Auntie Doris thought I'd written a book about her, and this was why. Side note, my nan, my the one that's still alive, my mother's mother, still gets annoyed that my Auntie Doris thinks that that book's about her because she has an Auntie Doris as well. I didn't write it about any Auntie Doris, I needed a name. Upon editing, I realised that I never actually gave the story of my nan's Auntie Doris. So, one of the reasons that my grandmother gets frustrated that I don't know anything about her Auntie Doris is because I apparently met her. Now, this is how petty my family can be. I met my nan's Auntie Doris. Now, my grandmother is currently 83 years old. Well, she'll be 83 in May. And I apparently met my nan's Auntie Doris when I was 3 months old at her birthday party. I mean, seriously. I'm sorry that my memory isn't that good. I'm sorry that at the age of 12 weeks old, I cannot remember your Auntie Doris. We got a letter at Christmas from one of my nan's cousins, and he revealed that Doris was still alive and she's approaching her 100th birthday this year and she doesn't require any help at all. She still lives on her own. And I'm like, great for Doris, but I don't know her. And that's just the type of familial history that I've got to remember. And so, there's absolutely no way that I want to involve myself in anyone else's familial drama. I am restricting it now. I could actually fill a video with petty squabbles that my grandmother has had before. There was even one when I said about wanting to go to South America after having read The Lacuna by Barbara Kingsolver and was informed that I wouldn't like it because one of my nan's distant relatives had gone there in the 1970s and caught food poisoning. Well, you don't catch food poisoning, but you understand. Anyway, I'll let you get back to things. Where was I? Anyway, to go back to my nan's father who beggared off when she was born because her mother died and he decided that he was going to go and start another family, I managed to find his new family. He didn't wait long. Within a year, he had got with another woman and had another kid. And I knew it was him straight away because I'd heard my Nana Alice say the daughter's name before. And because all these other brothers and sisters that appeared were people who'd been to my Auntie Doris's birthday party / funeral. She's still alive. I believe she's about 94 or 95 now. Yeah, I found all these people. And then I start looking and I find who they married. And eventually it reaches the 1980s. And I'm able to go on Facebook and I'm able to see these people that I am supposedly related to. And I really kind of confirm for me that they're related when I check their family part of Facebook and see the names of several other names of several other people that have come up during this search. Now, I was only going to do this free trial for 2 weeks. Then I discovered that you could only have 250 relatives on there. Well, 250 relatives with the way that my family procreated ended up meaning that I could only go back to about 1880. And that was my grandfather's relatives done and my great-grandfather's relatives done, and I managed to get in some of my mother's relatives, which made my mum very unhappy because she thought, why wouldn't I want to focus on her tree? And as I pointed out, I know everything that's going on her side of the tree. But we hit the 250 mark on this history website. And I recognised that I had relatives that I didn't know about, that I have never met. There were people coming up in Australia. There were people coming up in America. Now, I knew I had American relatives because My Nana Alice always told the story of how one of her aunties married an American and moved over there and she never forgave her. I mean, I'd like to point out that my Nana Alice held on to this until she was well into her 70s. And she was only a child when her auntie moved to America. So that man was never going to marry her. But she just liked men with ginger hair. Now that I have discovered that I have all these other family members, I don't want to do anything with the knowledge. Someone sent me a message on this site and asked me whether we were still in Cheshire and how we were related to their family tree. Because it was their tree that had helped me figure out my own. And it's like, this isn't really what I wanted. We were always brought up very close to my mum's family, very close to my cousins. My mum was very close to her cousins, and like, it's such a case that my nan, my mum's mother, is an only child, but she was brought up with her cousins, and so my mum called those cousins aunties and uncles, and then that stuck when I was born. My mother had 3 children and 2 stepchildren, so there were 5 of us. This was a very full house growing up. I talk all the time about any sort of family event when I was younger. We'd have to book out the cricket club, or if they came to my nan's, that place was full. To get around anywhere at Christmas, you was starting at 8 o'clock in the morning, not finishing till 11 at night, just to hit everyone who lived in the same area as you. That was just what was like the core family. A few years ago, I even mentioned in a video that I like to stick to the core people in this house now, and you focus on home before you focus on the relatives outside of it. Of course, you have to think about your older family members. I was very close to my grandmother growing up. I mean, quite honestly, I was closer to my grandmother's family than I was to my father's family. I had barely any interest in getting to know them. Not because I didn't like them, but more because they're more into farming, and that's not to do with me, where they're, you know, I'd go to my grandmother's, I'd walk up the road and visit my Auntie Hilda, and everywhere I went I'd get tea. And it was a different life when I stayed at my grandmother's. I think I wanted to build this connection I've got with my mother's family history and try and build it with my dad's biological family, and my grandmother's, my Nana Alice's biological family. But with any sort of family history, you're making up myths, you're making up legends, and family stories often get bloated and they change, and anecdotes shift around, and depending on who the person is, it's going to change the telling of that story. I am not able to create any sort of myths or legends about the family members that I didn't know. I've discovered that these people exist. It's not been 3 days of fruitless searching. It has helped me reach this point where I recognise, actually, now that I know, it's almost ruined the myth. It's almost ruined this idea that these people I've never known were aloof and mysterious and they could have been anyone, because now I recognise that they were just people and they've continued to have lives. Well, apart from the dead biological grandfather, he kind of stopped having a life in 1963 when he carked it. But my Nana Alice's real father did continue to have a life, and I know that in the 25 years that she was alive before he died, she met him once. And I think finding all of these things out has made it somewhat easier to put these people to bed and think, right, they exist. I know they exist. But I have this entire mass of people that I'm related to already on my mother's side of the family. They have their fair share of arguments, their falling outs, and their tragedies. And half the time, I only ever found out what was happening to them at Christmas. Why go and try and add several more branches to a tree that I've not had anything to do with in 28 years? And before that, we hadn't had anything to do with since 1937. And in the case of my dead, well, all my grandfathers are dead. My father's biological father, I had never had anything to do with, and I'd never known him. And I think that was the thing, was just knowing who my father ended up with. Could he have had better? And I think it did cement with me this idea of not living in the past. So I've got the knowledge there, and I don't have to do anything with it. It can all go now because I found out what I wanted to find out, and my family is big enough as it is. I've always maintained this idea where people say you can choose your friends but you can't choose your family. I've always said you can choose your family. Certain things have happened over the years, and things get said, actions get taken, and I will disagree with you, and sometimes this disagreement opens ways for discussion and debate, and sometimes people's attitudes won't change, they're unmovable, and they're hurtful. I have never had a problem with just distancing myself from that. So it's one of those cases where I will be civil to you, but no, most people recognise that there is this dislike there. Someone's even brought it up with me before and said, you don't like me because my face betrays me. And it's like, I know I don't like you, but I'm not going to be unkind to you. I just don't want anything to do with you. And the idea that I could have 70 more people to do that with just wasn't thrilling to me. So, as with all things, I am sticking to the core 7 members of this family. Me, my mother, and my siblings. And there are a few outliers there that I do care about, but for the most part, I've discovered my lineage, and I have no interest in finding out any more. Saying all this, I can guarantee that once my nan, the living one, finds out, she's going to have me signing up to tons of websites to try and just put in all of the names. All of the names. You have no idea how much I confused that computer because of my grandmother's side of the family. Seriously. My uncle, in a relationship with someone who went to school with his second son, and his son is in a relationship with her sister. Completely confused the system when I had to put in that my uncle is his son's brother-in-law. So what else has been happening this week? I continued to watch films as I was writing. I've kind of ruined my wrist again by writing longhand, but there's just something that flows more easily for me when I'm writing longhand as opposed to typing. I cross things out a lot. I did write the same scene 3 days in a row trying to get it right. I wrote it with one character and it wasn't working, so I wrote it with another character and it wasn't working. So finally I figured it out in my head and managed to write the end of it. So now I need to go back and write the start of it today. I watched some films, as I say, whilst I was writing. I did Drag Becomes Him, which is the documentary about Jinx Monsoon, who is the season 5 winner of RuPaul's Drag Race. And I'm sorry if that's a spoiler, but you should know this by now. I didn't care for this one as much as I cared for the documentary about Trixie Mattel. But as one of the early documentaries about people from this show, I was happy, and I think it did a good job of charting this person's career. I think that what I really would have preferred was to get to see their show, and that wasn't what this film was. So the film did what it was supposed to do, but I wanted something different, if that makes sense. I also watched a film with Elvira, which was Elvira's Haunted Hills. I don't know. It basically gave me all the thrills of Carry On Screaming. There was innuendo in there. It was campy. It took the mick out of the horror genre. I loved it, really. But then I really do like the look of campy, tacky, cheesy films. And I know that I watched something else, but right now I really can't remember what that was. Oh, Knives Out. This is that big film that has the huge ensemble cast where the patriarch of this family has died and there is a will and there is a maid. It is a bit of a whodunit, but then it becomes this sort of whodunit and then changes back into a whodunit. I thought it was a bit too long. I think it was trying to pay homage to an Agatha Christie, but I'm not sure it did it well. I wasn't the biggest fan of it. I only watched it because it was going off the platform I was watching it on that day. People had recommended it to me because I like crime shows and that sort of thing. I don't like crime. I thought that the acting was okay. You know, they put on some good accents. The set was superb. But it was a lot of just telling you what characters were like as opposed to showing them. And it did a lot of back and forth. And strangely enough, my favourite part was where they would sit down, each individual cast member, and they would be giving a monologue. And I feel like I could have watched 2 hours of those monologues, which are so tense because you know that these people are lying because it's showing you them lying. But then it transitions into the actual film where they're going around trying to figure out who the killer is. And it felt like a lot of different pieces of a film rather than one cohesive piece. But then at the same time, I do suppose that it says a lot about the way rich white people treat those who are less fortunate than them. This week I'm still working on the final Doris book. I'm about to head into the 6th monologue of 9, and as I said at the start of this video, I worry that I am not as humorous as I was with the first book, or the second, or even the third. I know that with the first book, I was seeking out punchlines all the time, and I feel like I didn't have to work so hard on trying to make it funny, whereas now I'm focused on the plot, and I'm focused on where the story is going to go. So I don't tend to write it for humour, and I suppose writing An Heir to Murder changed the way I went about this, and also I have said all along that I planned for each book with the writing style to change somewhat until I did eventually have a book that read like a novel but still had Harold's humour in there. At times I have made myself laugh, but is that really a sure sign? I used to gauge how funny my books were by giving them to my mother, and she didn't laugh at all in the reading of this one. I don't know whether my humour's got too dry or whether my book is awful. And yeah, same as with An Heir to Murder and a Doris Ahoy, I just have to go, well, I'm trusting my gut with this one. And this is telling me this is the way that the story has to go. Once again, I changed my plans. This happens all the time when I think that a scene doesn't fit anymore, and I recognise that one scene I'd added to this latest monologue no longer fit tonally. The story had gone in a different direction, or had it gone in... I don't think the story had gone in a different direction. I think that once I had written the preceding scene, I recognised that it was no longer necessary to include this scene, and it might pay off to withhold it until later. And if I think if it's later, then there's a perfect spot for it to go. But if it doesn't, I can remove it from the story and it won't change the overall impact I hope. Whether this book has any impact at all, I don't know. I'm still concerned about how I'm going to get this book printed now that we have left the EU. And because most of the time when you print your books with Amazon, they come from Poland. Originally, when it was with CreateSpace, they used to come from somewhere in America. So I could just publish the book and not have any copies for myself, which would be the first time I had ever done that. Or I find another printer, which I planned to do with An Heir to Murder, and it never happened. It's just, I think with Amazon, it's one of those things where it's to do with ease, isn't it? But then there's the whole ethical issue behind that. But a lot of people purchase my books on Kindle rather than purchase hard copies. So there are a lot of different things to weigh up in relation to that. I'm hoping to have made some good headway into this next story by next week, simply because I'll be writing about Christmas in February. Since I've been talking for a while, shall I talk about the books in which I am reading? So Simon of Savage Reads and Tom of Tom Reads Things are currently hosting the Winter Book Hibernation, which is something I chose to take part in because I felt I hadn't read enough books this month. And so I have finished reading Winter by Ali Smith, which I'm also reading for a read-along hosted by Sarah of Hardcover Hearts, and we're supposed to finish that by this coming Sunday to discuss it. And I have read The Rain Heron by Robbie Arnott, and you will be hearing my thoughts about them in my wrap-up whenever that happens. But they are books that I have ended up rather enjoying. As with the last discussion of Autumn by Ali Smith, Winter has been improved by reading it with a group who've been able to provide much needed insight. The Rain Heron is the second book of Robbie Arnott's I've read, having read Flames last year, and it does something similar with the story in going into a different character's head to tell each portion of the story, and I appreciated that. I like that. I'm still not sure how I feel about the ending, so as I've got a few days to mull it over before I review it, I am going to take my time and think about that one. Another book I'm reading for Book Hibernation is Angel by Elizabeth Taylor. I started reading this last night. I didn't recognise that the first chapter was going to be 40 pages, but basically Angel is a teenager and she lies about where she comes from. This book, I believe, is set in the late 1890s, early 1910s. Well, not in the 1910s, like the early 1900s, like that first decade. She is 15, so it's set in the year 1900. Angel wishes to have a better life than what she has. She is telling people that she will inherit this big estate when she hits 18, and within the first chapter that all collapses, and while she has chosen to hide out in her room and not go to school due to the embarrassment, she decides she's going to write a novel because she recognised when she wrote an essay for school that it was when she was at her happiest. And so we've reached a point where she's talking about becoming a writer, and she's chosen not to go to school because she's going to write this novel. And I won't lie, even though I was off school a lot when I was younger, and there were tons of times when I was ill or anxiety got the better of me, that sort of thing, there were some times when I just wanted to stay home and write. And I think people knew that about me. My friends used to say to me, how do you manage to write so much? And I'm like, because it takes so much time off school. No wonder I don't have many qualifications. I could empathise with that. And I like this idea where she says she's not going to go back to school because she's going to write a novel, and when she's finished that one, she's going to write another one. I was like, good on you, love. Good on you for thinking that's how this works. Although, to be fair, a lot of the time people didn't have the distractions that they do nowadays, so they probably did just finish writing one book and started writing on another. Is that what Anthony Trollope did, or is that what somebody else did? I don't know. Either way, I'm planning on reading some more of this today. Very fast-paced, very great writing. What I found with Elizabeth Taylor is, depending on the character that she's writing, it influences the way that she writes the story. So this novel does very much feel like it's got the energy of this 15-year-old really getting into writing for the first time, while still capturing the different characters and capturing the sense of time and place. Another book I started last week is Gilead by Marilynne Robinson. These were secret purchases of mine. I finally purchased the entire series of these. So I got Gilead, Home, Lila and Jack, and I'm planning on reading them. I'm 127 pages into this, and it's another one where I have to go slowly over this one and mull it over because I feel like there's a lot being said between the lines. It's a bit of one of those heartbreaking, reflective stories. I don't know why I said heartbreaking, because it's not broken my heart. It's a bit maudlin, because this guy's on his deathbed relating stuff. And this is really what got me thinking about how we mythologise our family history and actually go back. It did kind of influence me going on this thing of looking for relatives, because you get the sense that this man on his deathbed has never really figured out how he feels about his relationship with his father and his other family members. We love a bit of reflection, and the way he tells his story is very much, well, it's Marilynne Robinson. The way Marilynne Robinson has the narrator narrate the story, it feels very much like that storytelling of someone passing down a narrative to a younger member of their family. So yeah, it's got a strong voice as well. And then I have also finally started reading the 5th season by N.K. Jemisin. I should say that these two books here were not part of my TBR for the book hibernation. This one I just picked up on Saturday and immediately just sat there and read 100 pages. It's a fantasy series that I have been meaning to get into for a while, and I've kept putting this on TBRs, so decided just to pick it up on Saturday. And it was when one of those things happens where you're just like, well, why am I not reading that book now? So I picked it up, I started it, and it kind of reinvigorated me to want to read, which is how I am reading 4 books at the same time, really, because this one just, I don't know, there's something here, there's something within the prose, there's something cinematic about this. As though N.K. Jemisin has been very visual in the writing of this, and you can very much see every single scene, and it feels like Jemisin has picked each scene and planted it at each point in the story as would fit in the film. So you've got small climaxes that would have, you know, this crescendo of music, and then you ease into the next scene. It does feel like it would translate very well to cinema or to television. I don't know whether that was the writer's intention or whether I'm placing something upon it, because it is actually quite fantastic, I'm finding, at only 100 pages in. I don't know enough about the characters yet, but there's a lot of world building going on, but it's world building that happens as the story progresses, and it's still very much active prose. And from the off, I feel like I could trust the author, even though I'd never read anything from the writer before. Okay, that's me. I did not mean to speak for 3/4 of an hour, but that's what happened. Apparently, I really wanted to tell you the tale of my family history and how I plan not to do anything with it. So have I not just wasted... Well, no, it's not wasted. We've said it's not wasted. Time can never be wasted. Can it? Can time be wasted? Can time be wasted? There's a question for you. Or does every experience end up helping us better ourselves as people or worsen ourselves as people? I don't know. When you're stuck at home as much as I am, you end up reflecting on things a lot. If you sat through all of that, I'm grateful. I'd recommend watching this at double speed, because I know I will. I hope that you got something out of this video besides sheer boredom. And until next time, that is all. You're never just going to stick around here and watch me make faces. Really? Well, I suppose there isn't much doing, so you may as well be here, hadn't you, really? I'm going to go and listen to some Italian pop songs. I don't know about you.